Here is part 1 written in simple, natural English. The afternoon was warm, and the sky above the royal landmark looked clear and bright. The kind of day when tourists filled the streets with cameras, maps, and excited chatter. But among the cheerful crowd that afternoon, one man walked with a kind of restless energy, as if nothing around him could make him relax. He had arrived in the city earlier that morning after a long, uncomfortable flight, and instead of shaking the tiredness off, he carried it like a heavy mood. Every small delay annoyed him. Every slow-moving group in front of him made him sigh. And every little sound he heard pushed him closer to irritation. He had come to the landmark mostly because it was famous, a place that almost every visitor took pictures of. But as he walked closer to the open courtyard, he found himself more focused on getting through it quickly and enjoying the scene. The crowd kept stopping to admire small details. Children laughed as they pointed at the guards, and people stepped aside to take photos. All of that only made him feel more impatient. As he reached the front area, he noticed one of the royal guards standing in position near the gate. The guard's uniform was clean and sharp, and he stood tall without moving, just like the others. But something about this particular guard drew the man's attention. Maybe it was because the guard's calm stillness contrasted with his own irritated mood. Maybe it was simply because the guard looked disciplined and focused, while the man felt neither of those things. Whatever the reason, he stopped walking and stared. For a moment, he simply looked, not saying anything. The guard didn't move, didn't respond, didn't even blink noticeably. He stood like a statue, the kind of stillness that most people respected. But instead of feeling respect, the man felt something else rising inside him, something foolish and unnecessary. His frustration from the day, mixed with his impatience, made him want to test the situation. He wanted to see if the guard was really as uncheckable as everyone said. He took a few slow steps forward, not close enough to break any rules, but close enough to feel bold. People around him noticed, though most tried not to look directly. Some had seen tourists behave like this before, and they usually hoped it wouldn't escalate. The man, however, felt a strange satisfaction in having even a small audience. He let out a small laugh, the kind that didn't come from joy, but from irritation mixed with arrogance. He pulled out his phone as if preparing to film something interesting. The guard didn't flinch. Not a muscle moved. The man tilted his head and studied the guard's face, searching for anything, even the slightest reaction. He mumbled something under his breath, a comment that wasn't necessary and certainly not kind. A few nearby tourists exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether they should step away or stay and watch. The guard still remained focused, his duty unchanged by the man's presence. The calmness in the guard's posture only seemed to make the man more irritated, as if he wanted something to happen, but nothing was happening. He lifted his phone higher and spoke, loud enough for people around to hear, making remarks he thought would get attention. Some visitors gently moved children aside, not wanting them too close to the scene. Others stood silently, their expressions showing a mix of concern and disapproval. Yet through all of this, the guard stayed still. His training had taught him to ignore distractions, to stay committed to his role regardless of what people said or did. Even though the man's words were unnecessary and unpleasant, the guard's expression stayed firm. He wasn't allowed to react to insults, and he didn't want to. His identity, his work, and his dignity weren't affected by rude comments from an annoyed visitor, but the man didn't understand that. He mistook silence for weakness. He mistook discipline for something he could challenge. So he continued. He stepped closer again, not enough to break the boundary, but enough to make it clear he was pushing limits. His voice grew louder, and his comments became sharper. His frustration from earlier had now turned into something he thought was confidence. Instead of feeling embarrassed, he felt powerful, even though the power he felt came from provoking someone. who was simply trying to do his job. People in the courtyard shifted uncomfortably. A group of older visitors whispered quietly to each other, shaking their heads. A young couple moved to the side, unsure if they should alert a staff member. A few people recorded on their phones, though they did so with a sense of discomfort rather than enjoyment. The guard stayed motionless, but the man didn't stop. He wanted a reaction. He wanted something he could tell people later, something he could post online. He didn't think about the guard as a real person, someone who had worked hard, trained hard, and carried serious responsibility. He saw him only as a prop in a moment he wanted to create. His voice grew even louder now, and he spoke with a tone that suggested he believed he was being clever. But the people around him didn't feel the same way. Some looked away to avoid watching. Others stared, hoping someone would step in. Finally, a staff member walked toward the man. The staff member's voice was polite, calm, and steady as they asked him to step back and give the guard space. They reminded him gently that the guards were working and that visitors needed to respect their space. But the man waved off the staff member's words with a careless motion of his hand, as if brushing away a minor annoyance. "Relax. I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, still pointing his phone in the guard's direction. The staff member didn't argue. They simply repeated their request with the same steady tone, and then stepped back, giving the man a chance to make the right choice. But the man didn't make the right choice. He took the staff's politeness as permission to keep going. He laughed again, louder this time. It echoed slightly in the open courtyard. People fell quiet, watching, waiting. Some hoped he would get tired and walk away, while others worried the situation would worsen. Still, the guard didn't move. The man stepped a bit closer again, bringing himself right to the edge of what was allowed. His voice dropped slightly, as if he wanted to say something that felt bold or shocking, but not loud enough for the staff to hear clearly. No one around him smiled. No one joined in. The only sound was the wind moving through the courtyard and the faint noise of distant footsteps. The guard's eyes remained forward, fixed, calm. His breathing stayed steady, his posture solid. He wasn't judging the man. He wasn't angry. He wasn't reacting at all. He was simply doing exactly what he had been trained to do. But the man misunderstood silence again. He mistook the guard's discipline for something else, something he thought he could break. And with that misunderstanding fueling him, he decided to go further. He leaned in just enough to show he was challenging the guard. He raised his phone again, angling it so that the guard's face filled the frame. The moment felt tense. Though nothing had happened yet, the man didn't realize that he had become the only one creating negativity in a place built on tradition, respect, and quiet admiration. He didn't realize how out of place his behavior looked among visitors who simply wanted to enjoy a historic site. He didn't realize that his frustration from earlier had turned him into someone the crowd wished would stop. And still, the guard did not react. The courtyard felt strangely still, as if everyone was waiting for the next moment. The guard's calm presence stood in sharp contrast to the man's restless anger. The silence around them had weight, the kind of weight that made people hold their breath. The man's voice rose again, louder than before, pushing the situation to a point where people felt uneasy. He didn't notice the shift in the crowd. He didn't notice how people pulled back, creating more space between themselves and him. He didn't notice how his actions were slowly turning him into the center of unwanted attention, but the guard noticed everything. He noticed the crowd's quiet worry. He noticed the man's tone and his closeness. He noticed the growing tension. And though he still stood still, he was fully aware. The moment felt like it was heading somewhere. Though no one yet knew what would happen, the guard's stillness held a calm strength. The man's behavior held a rising edge. And the crowd, watching silently, waited for the next move that would shape the rest of the story. And the man, unaware of the turning point he was walking toward, took one more step forward. The moment after the man took that final step forward felt heavier than the air itself. People around the courtyard could sense that something was shifting, even though nothing dramatic had happened yet. It was the kind of quiet tension that made strangers glance at each other without speaking, as if sharing the same thought. This had gone too far. But the man didn't see any of it. He was too caught up in the strange confidence that had taken over him. A confidence built on frustration rather than strength. He adjusted his phone and moved it closer to the guard, almost as if he wanted the camera to capture every detail of the guard's expression. But the guard's expression didn't change. His posture didn't shift. His focus didn't break. He stood exactly the same way he had since the moment the man approached. The man, however, mistook this silence again. He believed he was in control of the moment. He believed the guard's stillness was a sign that he could push a little more. And with that wrong belief guiding him, he leaned in and spoke loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. The words he said weren't dramatic or clever. They weren't even interesting. They were simply unnecessary and rude, spoken only to provoke. People close enough to hear them looked down or turned away, embarrassed on his behalf, even though they didn't know him. A family with 2 young children stepped back, guiding the little ones behind their legs as if shielding them from an unpleasant scene. One person sighed quietly. Another shook their head. A young tourist whispered to her partner, "Why is he doing this?" The partner only shrugged, keeping his eyes on the guard to see how he would respond. The guard, of course, didn't react. His face stayed calm, his eyes fixed ahead, his shoulders steady. He was trained for this. He had practiced this stillness so many times that it had become second nature. Even under pressure, even under insult, even under the weight of another person's negativity, his discipline stood firm. But discipline doesn't make someone unaware. The guard heard everything. He felt the crowd's discomfort. He sensed the rising tension. He understood exactly what the man was trying to do. And though he remained silent, he stayed alert. The man, blinded by his own annoyance, couldn't see any of that. He waved his phone around again as if filming some sort of performance. He kept speaking, each word sounding more forced than the last. He thought he was sounding bold, but the people around him knew he was only digging himself deeper. A group of school students who had been standing at a distance began drifting away, guided gently by their teacher. The teacher whispered something to them about respecting people who were doing their jobs. The students nodded and left the area quietly, their footsteps soft against the stone ground. The man didn't even notice them go. At this point, his behavior had caught the attention of almost everyone in the courtyard. Even those who hadn't heard his earlier comments could sense something uncomfortable was happening. They could feel the tension in the air, like a cold breeze. Still, the guard remained still. The man took a breath, preparing to say something else, when another staff member slowly approached. This staff member was older, with a calm presence that carried years of experience. They stopped a few steps away and spoke in a soft but clear voice. "Sir, please step back." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was simply a request delivered in a way that expected understanding. But the man didn't understand. He turned his head sharply toward the staff member. "I'm not doing anything," he said. His tone carried defensiveness, as if he were the one being wronged. "You're very close to the guard," the staff member replied, maintaining the same steady tone. "We ask all visitors to keep a respectful distance." The man scoffed. "He doesn't even move," he said, pointing at the guard as if presenting evidence. "That is part of his duty, sir," the staff member said. "Please give him space." It was a simple request. It could have ended everything with no trouble at all. But the man wasn't ready to let go of his frustration. He felt challenged, even though no one was challenging him. He stepped sideways instead of backward, keeping the guard in his camera frame. "I'm just filming," he said sharply. Some people in the crowd exchanged looks. It was clear to them that the man wasn't here to film a memory. He was here to provoke. The staff member hesitated for a moment, then stepped back. They had done what they could without escalating the situation. Now they stood at a distance, watching closely. The man continued speaking, though now his voice carried a hint of stubborn pride rather than boldness. He wasn't trying to be funny anymore. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply pushing forward because he didn't know how to step back. He lowered his phone for a second, perhaps adjusting his grip, and then lifted it again. The guard still didn't move. The crowd still watched. The tension still grew, but something in the man's expression began to change, not dramatically, not suddenly, but slowly. It was small at first, almost unnoticeable. A flicker of confusion, maybe, or uncertainty, as if he was beginning to wonder why the moment didn't feel the way he expected it to. He had imagined the guard would react. He had imagined people would laugh or cheer or find his behavior entertaining. But none of that happened. All he found was silence, stillness, and the steady pressure of many eyes watching him, not with admiration, but with disappointment. For the first time, he felt a hint of discomfort, but instead of stepping back, he tried to hide it. He puffed out his chest slightly and lifted his chin as if trying to show confidence. His voice rose again, though now it sounded less sure. The guard remained unmoving. A faint breeze passed through the courtyard, brushing against the edges of the guard's uniform. The man's shirt fluttered slightly in the wind, though his stance didn't change. He continued speaking, trying to force the moment to go his way. He didn't realize the moment had already slipped out of his hands. The tension deepened, and even though no one said it out loud, everyone in the courtyard could feel that something was about to shift. Whether it would be a small shift or a big one, they weren't sure. But they could sense the turning point approaching, as clear as the shadow of a moving cloud. The man took another step, nearly crossing the invisible line he had been warned about. His phone moved closer again. He tilted his head, preparing to speak in a tone sharper than any before. And just as he opened his mouth, a faint but unmistakable sound came from the guard. A step. The sound was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was simply the firm, clear shift of a boot against stone. But in the heavy silence of the courtyard, it echoed like a signal. The guard had moved. The man froze. The crowd froze. Even the wind seemed to pause. The guard's movement wasn't aggressive. It wasn't fast. It was simply precise. He adjusted his stance, placing his foot firmly on the ground in a controlled way. His eyes remained forward, but something in his presence had changed. The man felt the difference immediately. The confidence he had been carrying dropped away in a single heartbeat. His hand shook slightly, and his phone wobbled in his grip. He had wanted a reaction, but now that a reaction had come, he didn't know what to do with it. The guard didn't turn his head. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't break his posture. But the air around him felt stronger, as if his stillness now carried weight. Instead of silence, the man took a step back without realizing it. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "He moved." Another person nodded quietly. A few people let out breaths they didn't know they had been holding. The moment felt different now. The tension had shifted into something more serious, though still respectful and controlled. The guard still hadn't spoken, but his single movement had changed everything. The man swallowed hard, unsure what to do next. His bravado had melted away completely. He looked at the guard, then at the crowd, then back at the guard. His voice, once loud and sharp, was now trapped in his throat, and the guard, standing tall and steady, remained ready for whatever would come next. The moment was no longer the man's to control. The balance had shifted. The story had turned. And the guard's calm presence, unchanged yet powerful, held the entire courtyard in quiet anticipation. The sound of the guard's boot touching the ground lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Even though it was such a small movement, it carried a weight that settled on the courtyard like a quiet warning. People stood still, unsure if they should breathe or watch even more closely. It was as if the entire place had paused to see what would happen next. The man who had been causing the scene stood frozen. His confident expression had faded, replaced with something unsure and shaken. He had wanted attention, but now that he had it, he didn't know how to handle it. His hand trembled slightly as he held his phone, and even though he tried to hide it, the camera shook with every tiny movement of his fingers. Someone in the crowd whispered softly. He finally moved. Another replied, "I think he's warning him." No one was speaking loudly. Everyone understood the seriousness of the moment. The guard didn't raise his head. He didn't turn his eyes. He didn't change his posture. But the step he had taken was enough to show that he had reached the limit of what he could ignore. It wasn't anger. It wasn't aggression. It was simply discipline adjusting itself when it needed to. The man opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. For the first time since he had arrived, he felt small. His earlier boldness had vanished completely. Instead of feeling like he was controlling the moment, he felt like the moment was staring back at him. He took another step back, this time intentionally. His phone lowered a little, though it was still in his hand. His eyes flicked nervously from the guard to the crowd. He suddenly realized that he wasn't impressing anyone. No one saw him as brave or clever. They saw him as someone who had gone too far. A little girl near the front tugged her mother's hand. "Is he in trouble?" she whispered. Her mother gently placed a finger over her lips to quiet her, then guided her further away. The man heard none of this. His heartbeat was too loud in his own ears. The guard remained still again, but the energy around him had changed. He looked exactly the same as before, straight posture, centered weight, focused expression. Yet something about him now felt stronger, more present. Even without speaking, even without moving again, he seemed to hold an authority that the man could no longer pretend didn't affect him. After a few long seconds, the guard's voice broke through the heavy silence. It wasn't loud, but it was firm enough to carry across the courtyard. "Stand back." The words were simple, calm, clear, but they hit the man harder than he expected. He swallowed, feeling his throat tighten. The guard's voice was controlled, not a hint of anger in it. It was the voice of someone who had practiced respect and order for years, someone who knew exactly when to speak and when silence was enough. The man hesitated, then stepped back again. This time, he didn't look around. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground, as if he couldn't bring himself to meet the guard's steady gaze. People in the courtyard relaxed slightly, though no one moved away. They wanted to see what would happen next. They weren't hoping for trouble. They were simply drawn to the intensity of the moment. The guard spoke again, his voice steady and controlled. "You must keep your distance." The man nodded quickly, almost too quickly. His voice cracked a little when he finally managed to speak. "Okay, okay." It wasn't confidence anymore. It sounded more like someone trying to make peace with a situation they should never have created. For a moment, it seemed like the moment was over. But the guard didn't return to complete stillness immediately. He took a breath, one slow and controlled, and then adjusted his stance slightly. It wasn't much, just a shift of weight, but it was enough to show that he was resetting himself. The man watched the guard with wide eyes. He took another small step back, putting more space between them. But then something unexpected happened. The guard, maintaining his steady tone, continued speaking, not as a warning this time, but almost like he wanted to teach something. You are a guest here. This is a place of respect. My duty is to protect this post, and I must remain focused. The man blinked, stunned that the guard was saying more. He had expected perhaps another warning, but not this. He lowered his phone completely now, letting his arm fall to his side. People around them leaned in slightly, not to intrude, but because they were surprised too. It wasn't common for a guard to speak this much. Many visitors knew the guards rarely moved, let alone gave explanations. The guard continued, still calm and steady. We do not move because we are trained to stay still. We do not react because our role requires discipline. But discipline does not mean we feel nothing. We are human. We hear everything. It was the first time the man seemed to truly understand that the guard wasn't just part of a ceremonial display. He was a person. A living, breathing person doing his job with dignity. The man cleared his throat, his voice small. I didn't mean. But he couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't know how to explain himself. The guard looked straight ahead still, but the weight of his words stayed in the air. Respect is important here, he said quietly. The man nodded again, though he wasn't sure if the guard could see him. I understand, he said softly. For the first time since the man had arrived in the courtyard, he felt something other than frustration or false confidence. He felt shame. Deep, heavy shame that settled in his chest and made him wish he could erase the last several minutes. He took another step backward, creating an even wider space between them. His phone hung loosely from his hand now, no longer raised for attention. It didn't feel like a tool for control anymore. It felt like a reminder of his worst moment. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. Some nodded quietly, impressed by the guard's calmness. Others looked at the man with understanding, not anger. Most people had made mistakes before. Most people had acted poorly in moments they later regretted. This moment felt like one of those times. The man finally looked up at the guard again. His voice came out slow, almost hesitant. I'm sorry, he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, honest, and necessary. The guard didn't respond right away. His face stayed steady. But after a brief pause, he gave a small, controlled nod. It was subtle, but it was enough. The man let out a shaky breath, relieved even though he still felt embarrassed. He slowly stepped back toward the edge of the courtyard, moving out of the way. He didn't want to draw any more attention. He wanted to fade into the crowd and think about what had just happened. But the moment wasn't over for the crowd. People looked at one another, quietly amazed by the guard's calm strength and the man's sudden shift in tone. A few visitors whispered to their friends about how unexpected the guard's response had been. They weren't gossiping. They were simply trying to understand the human side of what they had just witnessed. One person near the back said quietly, "He handled that better than most people ever could." Another nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, the man found a spot near the wall, away from the main path. He didn't sit or crouch or try to hide. He just stood there, his phone still in his hand, his breathing slowly calming down. He kept replaying the guard's words in his mind. We are human. We hear everything. The sentence hit him harder than anything else. He had known it, of course. Guards were people. Everyone knew that. But in the moment earlier, when he had been annoyed and restless and craving attention, he had treated the guard like he wasn't real, like he didn't have feelings or dignity. Now, with the guard's calm voice echoing in his mind, the man felt the weight of his mistake. The guard, meanwhile, finally returned to full stillness. His posture straightened completely, his gaze fixed forward again. To anyone arriving at the courtyard now, he would look exactly like any other guard on duty. Unmoving, focused, silent, but everyone who had witnessed the moment knew better. They knew he had spoken with strength and restraint. They knew he had handled the situation with dignity. They knew he had shown what real discipline looked like. The man stood quietly, no longer trying to film or provoke. Instead, he simply watched, learning something he hadn't expected to learn that day. What he didn't know was that the moment would stay with him much longer than he imagined. The guard's calm response, unexpected and powerful, would follow him long after he left the courtyard. And though the tension had finally eased, the story was only halfway through. The man had been humbled, but the next part of the day would show him something even more surprising, something that would stay not just with him, but with everyone who had witnessed the moment. For now, the courtyard settled into quiet again. The crowd slowly returned to their own visits. The guard remained steady, and the man stood off to the side, feeling the first stirrings of a change he never saw coming. The afternoon sun was slowly sinking, leaving a soft golden glow over the courtyard as people gathered around the guard and the visitor who had caused so much tension earlier. The air felt heavy, but not with anger anymore. It was something else now, something people could not name yet, but they felt it. It was like everyone sensed that something important had just happened, something that shifted the way they looked at the guard and even at themselves. The visitor stood there. Still a little shaken from the moment, the guard spoke with such calm strength. His face was softer now. His shoulders were no longer stiff. The guard did not appear upset, nor did he show any sign of pride. He just stood tall, silent and steady, like someone who had learned long ago how to stay rooted no matter what winds blew around him. Not one of the tourists nearby whispered to her friend, asking what had happened. The friend tried to explain, but even she seemed unsure how to describe it. She only said that the visitor had said something rude, and instead of reacting with anger, the guard answered in a way that stopped everyone in their tracks. That small description did not carry the weight of what truly happened, but it was the best she could manage. For a moment, the visitor looked like he wanted to turn and walk away, but something inside him held him back. His feet stayed planted in the same spot. His eyes kept drifting back to the guard's face. And even though he didn't want to admit it, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: uncomfortable honesty. Some of the people standing around started to move, but slowly. No one wanted to leave yet. It was like they were watching a second scene unfold, something quieter, but just as meaningful. The guard finally shifted his gaze. He looked at the visitor not with judgment, but with a kind of patience that surprised even him. The visitor took a small breath, almost afraid to speak, but he pushed himself to do it. "I didn't expect you to answer like that," he said quietly. The guard didn't reply. He didn't break his posture. He didn't even look away. He simply waited. And strangely, that made the visitor more willing to keep talking. "I didn't think about what I said," the visitor added, lowering his eyes. "I shouldn't have said it." Someone in the crowd nodded slightly, not in a mocking way, but as if they understood that this was the hardest moment for the visitor, admitting his fault in front of so many strangers. The guard finally spoke, his voice steady and low. "Words matter," he said, "but so does what you choose to do after them." The visitor swallowed hard. He had no excuse to offer, and he knew that anything he tried to explain would only make him sound defensive. So he kept it simple. "You're right," he murmured. There was a short pause, then the guard added, "We all learn. Some lessons come softer. Some come harder. But we learn." The visitor nodded. He looked like someone seeing a side of life he had never taken the time to notice. It wasn't anger that had changed him. It wasn't embarrassment either. It was the realization that dignity could be stronger than any insult. The people watching could sense that something inside the visitor had shifted. They didn't know what kind of person he was outside this place, what kind of life he lived, or what opinions he held before arriving here. But they could see the change in his posture, the way he stood, the quiet look in his eyes. One of the older men in the group stepped closer, approaching the guard carefully so he wouldn't disturb his stance. He whispered, "That was handled well. Very well." The guard gave a slight nod, nothing more. The older man then turned toward the visitor and gave him a small encouraging look, as if silently telling him that it wasn't too late to change. The visitor drew in a deep breath, then let it out slowly. He looked around, noticed how the entire group had watched him. He never liked being the center of attention, especially not like this. But now, instead of wanting to run, he felt something else, something that surprised him. He felt grateful that he had been called out in a way that didn't destroy him, but opened his eyes. The guard, still firm in his position, added in a calm voice, "Everyone deserves respect. You do. I do. All of them do." It was a simple sentence, but it hit deeply. The visitor nodded again, this time with more certainty. "I see that now," he said softly. There was a quiet moment that followed. People didn't clap or cheer. They didn't need to. The silence itself felt powerful. Finally, the visitor took a small step back, giving the guard space. But something in him still didn't want the moment to end without saying one last thing. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was sincere, not loud, not forced. Just real. The guard didn't answer. He didn't need to. His calm expression said enough. The visitor walked away slowly, passing through the crowd that made room for him. No one stopped him. No one whispered about him. They simply watched him go, understanding that he was carrying something heavier but more valuable than when he arrived. As he disappeared into the distance, people started to talk quietly among themselves. Some said they had never seen such a moment before. Others said they learned something too. A few even admitted that they might have reacted badly if they were in the guard's position. The guard stood still, returning to his duty without a hint of pride or disturbance. It was like the event had never happened, at least from the outside. But deep inside, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: quiet satisfaction. Not because he won anything, but because he had shown strength without harming anyone. The older man who had spoken to him earlier looked at him one last time before walking away. His smile was small but sincere. The guard didn't move, but he saw it. And that was enough. As the crowd slowly broke apart, the guard became just a guard again, standing in his royal uniform with the same steadfast posture. People came and went, taking photos, admiring the place, whispering to each other about the history of the grounds. Life began to return to normal, but even as things settled, those who had stayed imagined that the moment they witnessed would stay with them for a long time. It wasn't a story of anger. It wasn't a story of punishment or conflict. It was a story of dignity. And that made it rare. Hours later, when the shift changed, the guard walked quietly toward the small room where he usually rested for a moment before heading home. He removed his hat carefully, placing it on the wooden shelf. The room was silent, but his mind wasn't. He replayed the moment, not in a proud way, but as someone reflecting on how easily a situation could have gone wrong. He had seen people lose their temper before. He had seen insults spark arguments that lasted far too long. But today felt different. People had watched something real, something honest. And maybe, without meaning to, he had shown them that strength did not always need to raise its voice. He sat down for a moment, letting his shoulders relax. For hours he had stood perfectly still, but it wasn't the physical effort that lingered in his thoughts. It was the emotional weight of the day. He closed his eyes and took a deep, slow breath. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He didn't think he had done anything special. But he did feel grateful that he had chosen patience instead of anger. After a few minutes, he stood up again, put his hat back on, and prepared to leave for the day. As he stepped outside, he noticed a small group of tourists passing by. They looked at him with respect in their eyes, even though they said nothing. He gave a small nod in return. Nothing more. The sun had dipped lower now, painting the sky with warm colors. The grounds were quieter. The visitor who had insulted him was long gone, but the moment remained floating softly in the memory of the place. The guard walked down the path, his steps steady and calm. The world felt the same, but also a little different. Maybe it wasn't the world that had changed. Maybe it was the people who had seen the exchange. And maybe, in a quiet way, that was enough. As he reached the gate, he paused for just a second and looked back at the courtyard, not with regret or pride, but with the feeling that something meaningful had taken place, something that didn't need applause or attention. Then he turned and continued walking, blending into the evening light, unaware of how many people would remember this day and tell the story again and again, not because of an argument or embarrassment, but because of the quiet power of respect and restraint. The next morning arrived quietly, with a thin layer of mist resting over the streets that led to the palace grounds. It was one of those mornings where the world felt softer, calmer, as if giving people a chance to breathe before the day truly began. The guard walked along the familiar path toward his post, the sound of his boots steady and controlled. He always arrived a little early, not because he had to, but because he liked a few minutes of silence before the crowds gathered. He pushed open the small wooden door to the guard station and hung his hat for a moment, running a hand over his hair. He didn't feel different, not on the outside. But inside, there was a quiet awareness that the previous day had left behind a feeling he couldn't ignore, even if he tried. He thought about the visitor, the one who had insulted him without thinking, and the way the moment changed right in front of everyone. He did not feel anger toward the man. Instead, he felt a strange sense of understanding, almost like he had seen a piece of the visitor that even the visitor himself didn't know how to face. After taking a breath, he put his hat back on and stepped outside to meet the new day. The sun was still climbing when the first few tourists appeared. They walked slowly at first, reading signs, taking pictures of the old buildings, and admiring the way the light touched the stone walls. But something felt different in their behavior. They looked at him with more attention, not in a way that made him uncomfortable, but in a way that made him wonder. A small group approached, moving closer than most tourists usually did. A woman spoke softly, careful not to disturb his stance. "Are you the one who spoke yesterday?" she asked, almost whispering. He didn't respond. He was not allowed to. But she wasn't disappointed. She nodded to herself, as if she already knew the answer. "I just wanted to say..." It meant something. "To many of us," she continued. Her voice was gentle. She didn't stay long. She stepped back and walked away quietly, leaving only a soft trace of her words behind. Throughout the morning, others came. Some didn't say anything. They simply looked at him with respect in their eyes, as if he had reminded them of something important, something about kindness, or patience, or strength. But then, in the middle of the day, something unexpected happened. From a distance, the guard noticed a familiar figure walking slowly toward the gate. The posture was the first thing he recognized, a slight hunch, a hesitant step, the kind of careful movement someone makes when they are unsure if they belong somewhere. It was the visitor. He wore different clothes this time. He looked calmer, almost shy, and as he came closer, it became clear that he wasn't here to cause trouble. People who had witnessed the moment the day before recognized him. Some turned their heads, whispering to each other. A few looked surprised that he had the courage to return. But he kept walking, one step at a time, until he stood a few feet away from the guard. He didn't speak right away. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, as if he wanted to make sure he chose his words carefully this time. Finally, he took a small breath and said quietly, "I don't know if you remember me." The guard didn't move. He didn't answer, but the visitor knew he had been heard. "I came back because I felt like I needed to," the man continued. "I thought about what happened yesterday. I thought about it all night." He looked down at his hands, then back up, his eyes filled with something honest. "I didn't treat you right," he said, "and it stayed in my mind. I kept thinking, why did I say something like that? Why did it even come out of my mouth?" He sighed deeply. "I don't want to be that kind of person." The crowd around them grew larger. People stood quietly, respecting the moment, but also wanting to witness what was happening. No one made noise. No one tried to push closer. They simply waited. The visitor continued, his voice unsteady. "I didn't say it yesterday, but I'm saying it now. I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, not rushed, not forced. They were real. The guard stood in silence. He wasn't allowed to respond, but the visitor didn't expect him to. "I just wanted to tell you that," the man added. "You didn't have to say anything yesterday, but you did. And it changed something in me." He paused for a long moment, then took a step back, giving the guard space. The people watching did not clap. They did not cheer. They simply absorbed the moment, understanding its weight. The visitor gave a small nod and turned to walk away. But as he did, something uncommon happened. The guard moved. He didn't break formation. He didn't speak. But he shifted his eyes just slightly, following the visitor for a second, a gesture so subtle most people wouldn't have noticed, but the visitor saw it. His eyes widened just a little, as if the small acknowledgement meant more to him than 1,000 words. He nodded again, deeper this time, then walked away quietly. People whispered gently, not in a gossipy way, but in admiration. "Did you see that?" A man murmured to his friend. "That meant something." Another said. As the visitor faded into the distance, the crowd slowly began to move again. But the feeling in the air lingered, soft, warm, and powerful. Later that evening, after the crowds were gone, the guard returned to the small resting room. He took off his hat and set it down. A fellow guard entered a moment later, holding 2 cups of water. "I heard what happened yesterday," the fellow guard said quietly. "And today, too." The guard looked up. "You handled it well," the other guard added. "Better than most would." The guard didn't answer, but he appreciated the words. "He came back," the fellow guard said with a faint smile. "That says something." The guard nodded slowly. "You know," the fellow guard continued, leaning against the wall, "people think strength is all in the voice or in the stance. But sometimes it's in the silence. You showed that yesterday." The guard looked down for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then he lifted his hat again, preparing to leave. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, he noticed a small group lingering near the entrance. It was the same older man from the day before. He had returned to. The older man approached slowly, careful not to step too close. "I just wanted to say," he said gently, "that what happened yesterday stayed with me." He paused, searching for the right words. "It reminded me that dignity can change a situation more than anger ever will." The guard listened. Silently. The older man smiled. "You did well," he said softly. Then he turned and walked away. The guard stood there for a moment, letting the quiet evening wrap around him. He didn't think of himself as someone special, but he knew that something meaningful had happened over the last 2 days. Not dramatic, not loud, but important. As he walked down the path toward home, the sky glowed with warm colors, and the evening breeze brushed softly against him. The world felt calm again, but now it carried a deeper sense of understanding. Some moments in life are loud. Some are messy, but some like this one are quiet and powerful, and they stay with people long after the day is gone. And without realizing it, the guard had given the world one of those moments. She woke up earlier than usual the morning of the meeting. Her small room was still dim, touched only by the first bit of daylight sneaking through the window. For a moment, she stayed still, listening to the quiet around her. Today wasn't like other days. It carried something different, something that made her chest feel both tight and light at the same time. She sat up slowly, rubbing her hands together to warm them. Her mind drifted back to the older gentleman's voice from the phone call. He had spoken gently, reassuringly, as if he wasn't offering a test, but simply a chance to breathe again. Still, she felt nervous, terrified even. What if she played terribly today? What if he realized she wasn't as good as he thought? The doubts came naturally. She had lived with them for years. She washed her face, tied her hair, and dressed in her cleanest outfit. Not fancy, just simple and neat. She didn't have anything else anyway. She stood in front of the small mirror near her door, adjusting her collar. She wasn't used to looking at herself for long, but today she wanted to make sure she didn't look like she was falling apart. After a small breakfast, she left her apartment, holding her bag tightly. The morning breeze brushed her cheeks and made her feel more awake. The city around her was already alive, but she walked as if she were in her own quiet bubble, carefully protecting the soft hope growing inside her. She arrived at the address written on the note, a modest building with wide glass doors. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The lobby was calm, clean, and filled with soft light. She felt out of place, but pushed herself to keep walking. A receptionist smiled at her politely. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" She nodded shyly and gave the name of the gentleman. The receptionist checked the schedule and nodded. "Yes, he's expecting you. You can take the elevator to the 3rd floor. He'll meet you there." Her heart thudded. She thanked the receptionist and stepped into the elevator. It felt like the ride took forever, even though it lasted just a few seconds. When the doors opened, the older gentleman was already waiting outside, smiling warmly. "I'm glad you made it," he said. She lowered her gaze respectfully. "Thank you for inviting me, sir. Come with me," he said. "There's someone I want you to meet." He led her down a quiet hallway to a room with a piano. A real piano. Not a keyboard, not an old, broken one. A polished, beautiful instrument with a presence that made her breath catch. Inside stood a woman, perhaps in her 40s, with an air of calm confidence. She looked at the waitress with kind eyes. "This is the person I told you about," the older gentleman said. "She runs one of the music programs here." The woman stepped forward. "I heard part of your performance from the wedding video. You play with emotion, not technique, and that's something that can't be taught." The waitress blinked. "Wedding video?" she echoed. "Yes," the woman said gently. "Someone from the wedding recorded you playing and shared it with the family. That's how I heard it. And that's why we wanted to see you?" The waitress felt her knees weaken slightly. So many people had seen her performance. The idea terrified her, yet a small part of her felt grateful too. The woman gestured toward the piano. "Whenever you're ready, you can play something. Anything you like. There's no pressure." Her palms grew sweaty. She stared at the piano for a long moment, afraid to embarrass herself. But then she remembered the feeling she had when she played at the wedding. She remembered the calm, the peace, the way the music felt like a place she belonged. She took a slow breath and approached the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys. They were smooth, cool, perfect. She closed her eyes and began to play. The notes came softly at first, almost hesitant, like she was walking on fragile ground. But as she continued, something changed. Her fingers remembered. Her heart remembered. She wasn't playing to impress anyone, she was playing to speak. The melody grew warmer, fuller. It wasn't a famous song or complicated piece. It was something she made up on the spot, something shaped by her life, her struggles, her quiet hopes. When she finished, the room fell silent. A complete, still silence. She slowly opened her eyes, afraid to look up. The older gentleman was smiling. The woman's eyes were soft, almost emotional. "That," the woman said quietly, "is what real music sounds like." The waitress felt her throat tighten. I'm not trained. I don't know notes properly anymore. I don't have money for classes. I don't." The woman stepped closer, stopping her gently. "Listen to me. You don't need to pay for anything. This program is made for people like you, people who have talent but no opportunities. We can help you grow. Not overnight and not with pressure, but with guidance." Her eyes widened. "You mean you want me to join?" "If you want to," the woman said. "Only if you want to." The waitress looked at the piano again. Her hands trembled slightly. A life spent working, struggling, worrying. Suddenly, she stood in a place where someone believed in her without asking for anything in return. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "I want to try," she whispered. The woman smiled warmly. "Then we'll start next week." The older gentleman clapped his hands softly. "I told you," he said with a gentle laugh. "Your gift was never gone. It just needed someone to hear it again." For the first time in so long, the waitress felt something shift inside her, like a heavy door opening, just enough to let the light in. The woman handed her a small folder with simple information about the program. She held it carefully, as if it were something fragile and precious. After the meeting, the older gentleman walked her out of the building. "You did well today," he said kindly. "I know it wasn't easy for you." She nodded, still overwhelmed. "Thank you, sir, for everything." He smiled. "You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me one thing." She looked up. "What is it?" "Don't stop believing in yourself again. Not after this." She felt her eyes warm, but she nodded firmly. "I won't." He walked her to the entrance, and she stepped outside into the bright afternoon light dot as she walked down the street. Holding the folder against her chest, she could feel her heart beating with a rhythm she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not stress, not hope, that quiet, steady hope. She knew life wouldn't magically become easy. She would still work her shifts, still deal with the challenges of daily life. But now, she also had something new, something that belonged only to her. A chance, a path, a beginning. That evening, when she returned to her small apartment, she didn't feel the usual weight pressing on her. Instead, she felt excited to practice. She walked straight to her old keyboard and plugged it in. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers gently rest on the worn keys. And for the first time, she didn't play to escape her life. She played for her future, a future she never thought she would have. Future now growing from the simple moment she sat at a wedding piano and let her heart speak. And this time, she wasn't going to let that part of her disappear ever again.